Breaking Bad is hands down the greatest TV series ever written. Okay, I don't know how many Breaking Bad fans are out there listening to this right now, but I just read an article that sort of confirmed that the alleged Breaking Bad movie is going into pre-production, or at least that there's a script in development. Right now, a lot of you might be following the prequel to Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, which just wrapped up its fourth season last year, and the fifth season is set to premiere, I think, sometime in September, and it takes place 6 years before Breaking Bad. This movie is something that fans, including myself, obviously, have been hoping for since the show uh, had its finale back in 2013, I believe it was. And the creator of the show, Vince Gilligan, is a mastermind when it comes to bringing the right cast and the right writers and the right directors together, and the right musicians for that matter, or DJs, because they tend to incorporate a lot of existing music, from like the 60s, maybe some old Western stuff, maybe a little bit of jazz, but it all seems to be around the late 50s and 60s era. There's always this little tinge, this little psychedelic tinge to the score, um, or well, the songs that they use, to the feel of the whole show. Just there's just a little bit of that psychedelic vibe, I guess, to kind of make it a little more lighthearted. The drug aspect of it, the methamphetamines aspect of it, whereas the show is otherwise really just a modern day western, which is why I think that Quentin Tarantino would have been an incredible contributor, writer, director, whatever, for at least one episode of that show. I'm actually surprised, now that I've heard myself say that out loud, that it didn't happen. But to cut to the chase, we don't know if the movie 100% is real, but there is a lot of evidence substantiating that claim, and we are really excited. The Breaking Bad fanatics. If you have not watched Breaking Bad and you are an aspiring writer, um, or you're not an aspiring writer, if you just haven't watched Breaking Bad, you need to go binge Breaking Bad right now. For those of you who have not watched Breaking Bad, let me go ahead and just say this, especially to the movie junkies who follow a lot of the big shot A-list Hollywood actors and directors and such. Uh, Oscar winner Sir Anthony Hopkins, who rose to prominent fame, at least in my generation, through The Silence of the Lambs back in the early 90s, sent a handwritten letter by mail to Bryan Cranston, the actor who portrays Walter White, the protagonist, anti-hero of the show Breaking Bad, sent him a handwritten letter by mail, praising him after he had binged the entire show on Netflix within 2 or 3 weeks. And this is a giant who's already left his footprint in Hollywood, praising an actor who's at least 15 to 20 years younger than him, praising him, not only praising his acting, but said that it was the finest acting that he had seen in literally years, and that he was just about to give up all hope on Hollywood's future until he saw Bryan Cranston's performance in that show. So I think that carried with it a lot of weight, a lot of gravitas. And I tell everybody that story who has not watched Breaking Bad, and somehow that topic gets brought in conversation. I always tell that story. So for the aspiring writers out there now, that story was just for everyone out there who hasn't seen the show. For the people who are aspiring writers, for those of you who may be working on a novel, working on a novella, a short story, a micro story, um, or just trying to come up with an idea, just something. I'm telling you right now, this show has it all. Specifically, though, what I want to address in this video, I mean, I could go into all the different aspects of writing a good story, or just writing well in general. Um, and then, of course, you get into screenplays, versus books. You get into, cinematography, and there's obviously more dimensions to uh, a visual representation of your story than just the written word. So, again, I'm going to cut all the fat out here because I'm not teaching a class on film and television. But I will reference them a lot on this channel for a way to effectively exemplify these principles, because some of the finest writing I find is in film and television. You have to find it, you have to hunt it down, but it's there. So, Breaking Bad, one of the most incredible things that show does is character development. I mean, it's a character study. That's what the show is. I mean, definitionally, at its core, it is a character study of the man Walter White. And this is not some kingpin. This is not some drug lord. This is not an orphan that was down his luck and was taken in by some shady uh, orphanage or group of teenagers that had their own gang, and uh, you know introduced him to the world of gang rivalry, and he became this great mafioso or anything like that. This is a average Joe the plumber type character at best. Incredibly intelligent, chemistry teacher at some local public high school. Not a whole lot of prestige to his name, but he absolutely loves chemistry, just loves it. And as the premise goes, he contracts stage 4 lung cancer, has 2 years to live. Just boom, out of nowhere. That's it. Episode 1. Just right off the bat, you're like, okay, so he's a dead man walking. And as you know, public school teachers, they do not get paid very well. And if you live in Kentucky, you know that their pensions are going away too. So they don't really have very good benefits right now either. And I'm not laughing as a mockery, but just to paint a very grim picture of this character. There is, he's hopeless. That's it. And that could happen to anyone. It's a very realistic story. Tragic, absolutely tragic. So you already are somewhat empathetic with him. You're like, or sympathetic. You're not empathetic quite yet, but you're like, oh, that's really sad. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And what you find out is that because he loves chemistry so much and he's such a genius with chemistry, that he makes the purest crystal meth. And he hooks up in a very uh, desperate state of action to leave some sort of financial plan for his family in his absence, a way to take care of all the bills, the schooling, the college fund for his 2 kids, their medical needs, his son who has cerebral palsy, um, or just take care of the mortgage, not have his wife left with this incredible burden. He ends up hooking up with a former student of his, a dropout, a junkie, um, Jesse Pinkman is the character's name, played by Aaron Paul, and does an incredible job. And he plays a very, very sympathetic character as well. And he's the distributor. He knows the market. He knows the business. And Walter White, pun intended, excuse me, knows the chemistry and makes the purest crystal meth. So it's kind of a dark comedy as far as the premise goes. Almost like the Coen brothers could have written this. But out of the 62 episodes that encompass this story, you see such a slow fade, such a gradual development in the character Walter White, in really all of the characters. But you don't see as uh, much of a 180-degree spin in a single character as much as you do Walter White. And the whole concept, I mean, conceptually, the idea was, let's write a story about a man who's like Mr. Chips and turn him into Scarface. And this isn't The Godfather. It's not some romantic, romanticized mafia family show or film or story. It's not Goodfellas, where it's just a bunch of foul-mouthed gangsters that are just, robbing people blind and shooting up joints. This is a very um, average Joe, realistic, empathetic show. And I would argue that most everyone that's watched it followed the character, stayed on that character's side through the entire transformation. And so all of that is to say that this show perfectly exemplifies the change in character. It shows character development in the purest, most realistic sense. And very quickly, who you thought was the hero, you could say turns into the villain, but it's not really that you were ever the purest, heroic savior, and it's not that you were ever the most evil, satanic figure either. There was this spectrum that you just sort of teetered in, and you saw external forces uh, that thrust you into certain environments, largely hostile with methamphetamines, and compelled you to make certain choices you might not otherwise have made. And these choices, compelled by external forces, led you on a trajectory that reached an outcome where suddenly you're no longer uh, the same person you were 62 episodes ago or 2 years ago on the timeline. You are no longer recognizable. When I first watched the show and finished the 62 episodes just for fun, I immediately watched the pilot. Well, immediately, as in like a couple of weeks later, after I took it all in. And when I watched the pilot episode, I looked at his character, and I almost had this emotional response. And I said, I don't know who this is. This isn't the man I saw in the finale. This is not the same person. And what it made me realize about myself, which was very haunting, though I came to peace with it, was that there um, th- there is no perfect person, obviously. But I realized, oh my gosh, uh, that's me. I could have found myself in that situation and made those same choices. I mean, as an audience goer, you tend to sit on your high horse and say, "Well, I would never do that. I would never kill that person, or I would never cook crystal meth. I would never get involved in any of this, tomfoolery, whatever you want to call it." But when you watch that show, that character never would have made the first step if it wasn't for that first push, which was not only stage 4 lung cancer, but stage 4 lung cancer, 2 years to live, financially strapped, wife that does not work outside of the home because she works full time in the home, taking care of a 15-year-old son with cerebral palsy and a newborn daughter. When you have all these factors together, it created a level of stress that almost, not to take responsibility away from the character, but it almost forced him to make that first step. And that is where there was such a slow fade that I remember when I finally watched the show a second time. I think I've watched it 3 times all the way through. Um, I can't tell you what the tipping point was. I can't tell you, oh, this is the part where he becomes, Heisenberg. That's his alter ego. That's supposed to represent, I guess, the dichotomy. Walter White is the good guy. That's the angel on this shoulder, and Heisenberg is the demon on this shoulder, and he's caught in the middle with the dichotomy of his conscience. That I could not tell you what the episode was. I couldn't tell you what the scene was. I couldn't. It's only 6 seasons, and I couldn't tell you what the season was. Where it's like, okay, this is where he becomes someone different. There was no binary. There was no overnight flip. It was just a gradual, slow fade, and it was just one bad succession of decisions after another that eventually led him to, the series finale. And it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. It was haunting. It humbled me, strangely, not just as a writer, but as a human being. I thought, oh, okay. I mean, if I had questions after the first time I finished the show, I had all the answers I needed the second time. And that was that I was fully confident that anybody um, given the right or wrong circumstances, could make every single decision that that character did. And that is incredible writing. To really move your audience that way, uh, gosh, I don't know how there's any other way to build a legacy. And sure, it's easier said than done, right? But you watch that show, and you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of uh, the, the character development. I mean, everything. The acting, the score, everything about it is perfect. But the character development as a writer was probably the most um, powerful thing that I saw. That's what connected with me. So when you're writing fiction, you don't want stagnant characters. It doesn't mean they have to do a 180 flip, but when you develop a character, every character needs to develop because you're not the same person today as you were yesterday. There might be a marginal difference, but it's those little marginal changes, those little nuances that over the course of a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, you you see how you were slowly becoming a different person and you see those milestones, but it wasn't an overnight flip. It was those little daily decisions you made that compounded over time. If you stagnated and never changed, well, first, you wouldn't be human. And secondly, you'd be kind of a boring, predictable person. I think you'd be boring to yourself. I think you'd be a bored person for yourself. I think you'd be boring to other people. Then again, maybe people would be comfortable knowing that you were predictable. I don't know. But in terms of writing, that's boring. And no reader wants that. And there really is no way to um, expand conflict with stagnation. If two characters have a conflict, one believes one way and one believes the other way, and no one ever changes their mind on anything, if they are identical day in and day out, then there's no movement. So I think part of the character development or part of the movement of the plot of the conflict is that the characters don't remain the same. They change, they evolve. Again, you don't have to have the good guy become the bad guy and the bad become the good. It's not about those binaries. Forget about that. You can still define your characters as okay, well, these are the heroes and these are the villains. But as I've said in previous videos, you need to make the villains somewhat sympathetic. Give them some quality where you say, okay, I get why they do that. I get why they think that way. And then with the good guys, give them some imperfections. That doesn't mean, oh, they killed a man once. Well, maybe they did. I don't know what kind of story you're writing. Maybe it's someone who was in prison for killing someone, and they saw the light, and they changed their life, and eventually they got out of prison, and now they, are kind of, some sort of boondock saint, you know. Uh, but you need to put some edge on the protagonist, and because you don't want a Boy Scout, and in the villain, you want more than just some, you know, ogreish, monster. You need to you can have those characters in the story, but the main ones, the primary protagonists, antagonists, uh, heroes and villains, or vice versa, um, they they need to have more to them than just simply pure good or pure evil. And when you can develop the characters and let the villain make a good decision once in a while. Let him make a noble decision, what I should say. I don't want to use good and evil too much because they're very uh, one-dimensional words that aren't as effective as I'd like them to be. Let the villain make a noble decision once in a while, where you go, oh, I actually agree with what he just did there. And then with the hero, maybe once in a while you're like, what's this guy thinking? What's this girl doing? Why is she sabotaging this whole plan, or what have you? Or maybe they get caught up in their own self righteousness that they make some stupid decisions. Maybe they make decisions that were egotistical, and you see that in Breaking Bad. And I probably shouldn't say much more beyond that, but you see where you start to really understand both sides. That doesn't mean you don't take a position, but it just means that, okay, now you've got more than just a black and white conflict with an easy answer. You don't want an easy answer. If you have an easy answer, then you don't have much of a story. You want something that really makes them think. Not every story has to be Inception or Interstellar, both incredible Christopher Nolan movies, but they make you think. Memento is another one he did. They make you really think. Like those are like textbook movies that you would, watch in your postmodern philosophy class in grad school or something. Um, but they don't have to be one dimensional. You can give uh, the characters their own internal conflict, not just their external conflict with each other. And I think the best way to do that is just to show the development and show how the environment changes those characters and impacts their uh, their processing, uh, internal processing to make the decisions that they make. That is imperative to any great story, and you see those decisions in Breaking Bad. When it comes to film, you see that in I'll say again, the Matrix trilogy. Please watch those movies. You see it in Star Wars, of course, with Darth Vader. Um, you see it in the Lord of the Rings, with the hobbits, especially Frodo. The internal struggle that he has with the ring. All of these great, um, you know, to some extent, literary classics have that kind of development and internal conflict. So that's probably what I would say ultimately Breaking Bad did was it showed not so much the external conflict as much as the internal conflict and how those two types of conflicts are interrelated, how they interact. It's simply the individual in the environment and how that relationship works. So when you get some time, when you get a weekend to yourself, binge all 62 episodes of Breaking Bad and then go start Better Call Saul. That's going to be a whole other video. I won't even get into that for now. But Breaking Bad, watch it. Watch it. Take notes if you have to, and go in there just with a clean slate. But I can promise you, you'll come out with a fuller understanding of the importance of developing conflict by character development.